Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to what month is it? The September monthly reading wrap up. That's what month we're living in. We started dabbling into some fall reads this past month, even though it's been literally feeling like summer weather. It's kind of annoying me that it doesn't feel like fall yet. I am wearing a sweater today for the spirit, but I'm honestly kind of hot and like kind of sweating in this sweater right now. I don't know wherever you're living, what the weather's like, but here in Toronto, in Canada, it's still feeling like summer and I'm over it because I want cozy fall reads and like cozy fall vibes. Anyways, back to the books. We ended up reading 13 books this past month, which honestly sounds kind of low seeing that I did a 24-hour readathon this past month, but one of the books that I read was like 800 pages long and one of them was 1,000 pages long, so I think that should add like 5 more books to that count. The breakdown for the genres of books we read this past month are 8 fantasy, 3 contemporary / literary fiction, and 2 romances. And there was definitely some like crossover between those genres, like some of the fantasy I read was more romantasy, but that's the breakdown. I also did end up finishing my entire September TBR, so pat on the back, on the shoulders for ourselves. Great job to me, and let's get straight into the first book I read. So I read Humor Me by Kat Shook. This is a contemporary fiction about a woman who works in like the late night show kind of comedy industry in New York City. She basically goes around to like comedy shows and scouts like new up and coming comedians to add to their roster, to their performer list. I think it's set like in fall in New York City and it definitely gives fall vibes. But back to the story, our main character is kind of like at the beginning of the book, throughout the book, she's dealing with grief because she has just lost her mother, but it's a weird kind of a grief because she was never really that close to her mother, so she's kind of dealing with feeling that loss, but then also dealing with the fact that it feels weird that she doesn't miss her in the normal way that like someone would miss their mother, like in a more traditional relationship. And then throughout the story, she befriends one of her mother's like old childhood friends and they sort of start bonding, seeing the different ways that her mother kind of like affected the both of them. This book is kind of just one of those like slice of life books, not very fast paced. There's not very much going on. We're just kind of like going through life with our characters. And so this one was just a little bit slow moving for me. And I'm fine with like slower moving plots, but I honestly feel like this book barely had even a plot. It was just so nothing much. It was also one of those books like by the end of the book, I was like, what did we learn? Like, what was the point in going through all of that with our characters? Also, I think the writing style like put me off a little bit in this book maybe because it was very kind of comedy based, like that stand-up comedy vibe, and the writing I think sort of tried to emulate that. And I feel like a lot of stand-up comedy really relies on the performance of the lines. Like, it's not really so much about the content, it's about how you deliver. And I feel like the way this book was written, it was trying to be very like comedy, very funny, but without someone like delivering those lines to you the way they were supposed to be delivered. It just kind of read very strange, kind of like very run-on sentencey. I don't know. There wasn't a lot that I enjoyed about this book, but I feel like there were parts, like small parts in it where I was like, oh, that's kind of nice, like that's kind of sweet at points throughout the book. I just overall don't think this book was for me. There was like not that much that happened, as I mentioned, and I feel like this book also brought up a lot of like real world politics, which I know like stand-up comedy tends to reach out for kind of current events, political things, and I don't know. I think I'm fine reading books that have elements of real life to them, but when they get so real world political, like hardcore politics, I like to stay away from those a little bit because I read to escape a lot of the time, right? Like I read to enjoy. I read to like get outside of my real life, and that's why I like fantasy so much. Like I don't want to think about the real world. I want to think about other worlds and other people's lives. And most books obviously take inspiration from real world things that are happening and then kind of like turn them into some other fantasy element. But yeah, this was just a little bit too like real world politics to me, and I was just like, I don't know if I want to expose myself to all of these feelings. Okay, I then went on to read 3 TikTok book talk viral reads, and this was a whole video that I did, so I'm gonna kind of go through these a little bit quickly because I talked a lot about these books in that video if you have not watched it. But the first one I started with was Quicksilver by Callie Hart. This is a fae-based romantasy, definitely written for the lover of ACOTAR. We follow Salis, who is very like Mare from Red Queen coded at the beginning of the book. She is this sort of a thief. She's living out in the slums. She's just stealing to survive. That is how she's getting through life. One day she gets caught for a particular theft. She gets brought to the queen and then she gets sentenced to death, essentially. But in a very dramatic turn of events, she gets whisked away into this entirely new fae world that she literally knows nothing about. No one knew that this parallel fae universe existed, but she ends up there. There is a very grumpy, kind of really bully, mean, but powerful fae who's kind of leading her way named Kingfisher. And she gets stuck with this task that the fae want her to do because she, of course, has this secret magical hidden talent that she never knew about, or she kind of knew about but was kind of suppressing. And we get into this whole like alchemy kind of based magic system, which is honestly very cool. It's very ACOTAR. Things just kind of blow up. So this book is definitely, it's spicy, it's got a big romance element in it. But for me, this book started off great. Like it started off, okay, maybe not great. It started off good for me and then it just like fell apart by the end of it. So the beginning was, you know, it was quite strong for me. It drew me in. I was into it. I was invested. My only critique at the beginning of the book was that the action sequences didn't make sense. And I talked about this in my video, my reading vlog of this book. But when I read action sequences, like to actually picture what's going on. So like if the author says the character grabs something with her left hand and swipes it to the right side, like I am picturing that physically in the real world. I'm like, yeah, okay, it's there. Now the sword's there. Now she picks this up. Like I need to know all of that stuff. I'm so like physical oriented. Maybe it's the dancer in me. I need that stuff to make sense. And I feel like the action sequences in Quicksilver, they just didn't make sense. But overall, I think the book had a really strong start. I then think it tried to do too much in one book. First of all, this book was quite long. I think it could have been split into multiple books, maybe 2 or 3 separate books, but I think it just tried to do too much. We started off with this really cool alchemy magic system, right? But then we didn't really spend enough time on that because we were trying to like also introduce different types of elemental magic, all sorts of magical creatures. The plot just got kind of chaotic and the world fell apart for me. So I didn't really enjoy that. And then also I was not into the romance in this book. And I know so many people are, but for me, it was just too bully. Like it was too mean. And like, I love a good enemies to lovers arc, but I need a good reason for the characters to be enemies. And like there's a line that I draw where it's like if one of the love interests does a certain thing, like the line's crossed, we can't go back, we can't turn into lovers from here, like there's no coming back from this. And I think in Quicksilver, Fisher, our love interest, was just too mean. And then when the explanation of why he was mean to her came out, I just couldn't get with it. I couldn't get with the program. I was like, no, that's not a good enough reason to be mean to your love interest. Like, no. Without getting too spoilery, no. That's all I have to say. So that was Quicksilver. It wasn't my favorite. I don't think I'm gonna be continuing in the series at this point, but yeah. Quicksilver. The next book I read for this video was Spark of the Everflame by Penn, and I really enjoyed this much more. Kind of a similar setup to, again, Red Queen. I feel like a lot of these new romantasy books that are coming out are really, really Red Queen, Hunger Games based. That is just the blueprint, so I don't know, it makes sense, I guess. We are in a world where we have regular human mortals with no magic, and then we have these sort of like human/god crossbreeds that are magical. And these magical people, oh, they do have a name. They're called the Descended. So we have our normal people and then we have the Descended. And the Descended are split into these different factions, where each faction is like geographically in a different place on the map, but then also each faction has their own type of elemental magic. Our main character, DM, is a healer. She kind of learned everything from her mother, who was also a healer, but at the beginning of the book, we find out that her mother has disappeared. She's been gone for a month. No one knows where she went. She kind of went off on like, I don't know, a healing job and never came back from it, and no one knows where she is. So DM starts kind of taking over her mother's role. She starts jumping into her mother's healing responsibilities. She ends up at the royal castle or palace where she has to heal some of the royals because her mother was on some kind of like really high level royal healing job that now DM has to cover. She gets kind of twisted into all of these like royal descended issues, also starts getting into this human rebellion that's going on. So it's very Red Queen. It's very powerless. It follows, you know, it follows the archetype. But I feel like just the way this book was written, I was able to get into it a lot more. It was slower pace, but I liked it more. I also enjoyed the romance a lot more in this book, which is really funny because I feel like the romance in this first book of the series was not even much. Like, we just kind of got little nibbles of it, but I love that slow burn. Like, I tend to say some of my favorite romances are romances that like never even happened. Like, they're not even on page or they're barely there, but those are my favorite romances. Like, just the subtle ones that you as the reader kind of like build up yourself. Like, there's more to the imagination. I love that. So that was what the romance was like in Spark of the Everflame. There was a little bit of intimate scenes, but I wouldn't call this book like spicy in the way that Quicksilver was spicy, for example. Like, the spice was written a lot more in like emotional terms. It was more about the feelings versus the actual like physical body parts, and I tend to like that a lot more when I'm reading about intimate romantic relationships on the page. So I really liked Spark of the Everflame, and I will definitely be continuing in this series. This one was a success for me. And then the third book I read in this viral book talk video was, I don't know why I have to look at my phone for this. I definitely know off the top of my head. It was Zodiac Academy. I kind of blasted this book apart in my reading vlog because I filmed pretty much my live reaction to the end of the book, and it was before I could gather my thoughts. So if I seemed a little bit harsh in my book talk reading video, I apologize, but I was just like kind of so in my like raw feelings from finishing the book, and for me, I feel like I wasted time reading this book, so I was just kind of like mad and frustrated. But I know there's a lot of people who love this book and this series. A lot of my friends love this series, and I don't think poorly of anyone who likes this series. It just really wasn't for me. First of all, it was very bully romance, and I already spoke about, like in Quicksilver, I'm not so into bully romances. I like enemies to lovers, but I don't like bullies. There's a difference. And this was very much bully romance. It was also just so over the top, vulgar, spicy for like no reason in my opinion. Everyone was hitting on each other. Everyone was like honestly like assaulting one another, including like teachers, like teacher on student type things. And I know this is a fantasy, and I know we're just like, it's for escapism, right? But I couldn't get into it. It was too much for me. I have not even talked about what this book is about. I just went straight into my feelings again. See, Zodiac Academy just gets me riled up. I don't know what it is about it. I don't think I have disliked a book so much. But this book follows two twins, Tori and what is the other one's name again? I feel like Tori is honestly the main character in this series. Like, I always forget about the second twin just in the way it's written. Darcy is the second twin. They start off in the human world. They're following the blueprint. They start off the book as humans stealing to survive. They're not very well off. They don't have much to their name. They don't have anything to their name really. And then they get whisked off into this magical school called the Zodiac Academy, where there is a Zodiac based magic system, which honestly sounds so cool. And that's why I wanted to like this book a lot, because I like the idea of it. I like Zodiac. I like the idea of like a Zodiac elemental magic system, and I like reading about fantasy schools. Like, it's just so much fun. But yeah, there was a lot of problematic relations in this book for me. There was just like so much non-consent vampire blood sucking that was like also a little bit sensual. There was, as I mentioned, just like teachers groping students with no consequence. Also, like, there were no rules at this school. Like, people just were able to do anything, and the teachers would just be like standing there like groping students and like not enforcing any type of rule, and it was just too outlandish for me. The writing style was also very like Wattpad-y, which honestly, like, that's not a make or break deal for me. Like, that is not a deal breaker. There's a lot of books that are accused of being Wattpad-y that I enjoy, like Fourth Wing, for example. Yeah, it was more, I think, just like what was going on in this book that I couldn't align myself with. And then yeah, just the romance. It was very bully. It was also just like very physical first, no real like emotional connection whatsoever. And that's just not my thing. But if you love the series, I love that for you. I'm so happy for you. I wish I could be into it because a lot of people talk about this series, and it's one of those worlds where I'm like, I wish I could get excited. Like, I wish I could get as excited as everyone else is about this, but I'm just gonna have to settle and feel left out on this one because I can't go on in this series. But that was Zodiac Academy. Next up, I read A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross, which is actually my book club September pick. Very different vibe from the Zodiac Academy. The writing, very much not Wattpad. The story, very different. The spice, non-existent, pretty much. In A River Enchanted, we get that beautiful Rebecca Ross poetic lyrical writing with a touch of mystery, which I love. Our main character is named Jack. He is like a music student. He comes from a magical island, but he's currently living on the mainland to study, when all of a sudden he gets called back to the island. And he's like, I haven't been on the island in like 10 years. Why are they calling me back? So he goes back, finds that the reason he got called back is because a bunch of young girls, like children, have started to go missing. And there's definitely something weird magical going on. We have a lot of like godlike elemental spirits that live on the island that control the elements like wind, storm, water from the ocean, fire, like ground, earth. We have a lot of elemental spirits here that are coming into play. And he's been called back because he has the ability to become a bard. And as a bard, he can use his music to sort of summon the spirits, try and figure out what's going on, try and find out who's been taking these girls. And yeah, that's the story. We get a little bit of romance in here as well. And I really enjoyed A River Enchanted. So it's definitely a much slower paced story. If you're looking for something quick, this is not the book for you. It's very slow. It's very sort of just vibes first. This is also a really good one to read in the fall. It's very, very fall. I think the way that this book ended really set up for the next book to be exciting. I think Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross did the same thing, where the end of Divine Rivals was like, whoa, like where's the next book gonna take us? A River Enchanted does the same thing. So I'm excited to read on in this duology and finish it and see where we go in A Fire Endless. And also just compared to Divine Rivals, I feel like Divine Rivals was maybe more fast-paced than this book, like more happened, but A River Enchanted had more magic, which is I think a criticism that I heard a bit on Divine Rivals, is that it didn't have so much magic in it. Like even by the end of the second book, there was like a little bit more magic, but still not really. A River Enchanted right off the bat just like immediately had more magic involved, so really enjoyed it. I then started my 24-hour readathon. So I'm gonna try and go through these books a bit quicker again, even though when have I ever actually gone through books quick? Never. So I started my readathon. I read 7 books, and the first one was From Lukov with Love by Mariana Zapata. This is a sports romance, which is also my first ever sports romance. But this one was great for me. I don't know if I would enjoy a regular sports romance, but this one was a figure skating romance. And me, if you don't know, I used to be a figure skater when I was younger, so reading a figure skating romance it tickles me in all the right ways. Like it just gave me joy reading about a romance on an ice rink, like at a rink. It was just great. So our main character, what's her name? I always forget people's names. I don't think I even wrote her name. No, I didn't even write notes on what this book was about, but we follow our main character whose name I don't remember. She is a pairs figure skater, but at the beginning of the book, she does not have a pair to skate with because her ex-partner dropped her for someone else, and so she currently just has no plans. She's like training for nothing. She doesn't have any competitions coming up. She's just kind of on her own. She also doesn't have a coach at the moment, so she's just really trying to keep up her own skills, but is kind of feeling defeated because she has no goal to work towards. She also, at the rink that she trains at, has this rival who has always been like, they've just always butted heads. They've never gotten along. He is another pairs figure skater, and they've always competed against each other, never like as a partnership. But then Of course, because of various reasons that you will find out when you read this book, she gets paired up with this rival. They have to learn how to get along, and it's a sports romance, so we know what happens from there. I thought this was really, really cute. I thoroughly enjoyed this story so much. Again, just like my inner child, like my inner figure skating child was like screaming, kicking, like giggling. It was just a great time. I do think that this book needed lots of editing. And some of you commented on my readathon video after I like gave my original thoughts about this book that I think all of Mariana Zapata or most of her books are self-published. So they really have not gone through editing at all. And so it really makes sense. Like her books are very long, but I found, first of all, I found that there were a lot of like spelling issues, like spelling mistakes, typos literally, and like just very simple kind of like grammatical issues that could have been cleared up very easily. There were just some conversations that went on for way too long. Like she kind of overdid the banter when our characters were bickering. Some conversations that should have been like 2 or 3 pages long ended up being 10 pages long, and that definitely added to the overall length of this book, which was like 510 pages, I think. So overall, loved the story, thought it was so cute. By the end of it, I was just like so attached to these characters as a couple. The things they're saying to each other, things that they're doing for each other, it was just adorable. But this book needs some serious editing. So if this book ever gets picked up for traditional publishing and gets a round of editing, I think it could be perfect. It could be a really good, close to a 5-star read. And I might be biased because I was a little figure skater, but I loved it. Next up, I read The Wedding People by Alison Espach, which is a literary fiction that is just, it was so honest and real. So we follow our main character who arrives at a resort because she is there to unalive herself, unfortunately. Her husband has just left her. Her life is just sort of falling apart. She has no real purpose in life. She's gone to this resort that was supposed to be a vacation with her and her husband, and she's gone there with an entire plan to like off herself. She's brought her it's not funny, but it's kind of funny the way it's written. She's brought her like cat's medication with her, and she is planning on using her cat's medication to like overdose, and like that's how she plans to do it. But she has this whole plan set in motion. She's like, I'm gonna stay at this nice resort, I'm gonna order room service, I'm gonna like pamper myself, and then I'm gonna take cat pills, which is like, it's not funny, but like it's kind of funny like the way it's written. But she arrives at this resort, finds out that it's actually the whole rest of the hotel is booked for a wedding, and she is basically not supposed to be there. Like the hotel was supposed to have not allowed any outside bookings for the week because of the wedding going on, but she managed to get a reservation. So at the beginning of the book, she meets the bride. She runs into the bride, and the bride's like, wait, who are you? Like, you're not here for my wedding? And our main character is like, no, I'm here to off myself. She literally tells the bride all of her plans, and the bride is like, no, like, you can't do that. You're gonna ruin my wedding week. Like, see how this book is kind of funny? Like, it takes a comedic turn on a very, like, serious subject. But yeah, she's like, no, you can't do that. Not because of you, but because you can't ruin my wedding. And so our two main characters just kind of start talking to each other. They continue to run into each other throughout the week. That's pretty much the book. We sort of get these, like, reflections and flashbacks of our characters, where they came from, how they got to where they are today. And then these two women just kind of, like, help each other through their current situation. And I found this book to be very heartwarming. Again, I found it to be just like a very honest look at life. It was kind of quirky and funny in the way it was written, but it was very honest in like the struggles that all of the characters were having. There was not a single character in this book that was perfect. I enjoyed it. I really thought it was like a breath of fresh air compared to like a lot of the other books that I've been reading recently. It was very different. It was very novel. I would highly recommend this book. Really enjoyed it. The Wedding People. Oh, and then I read The Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. Very different. Back to kind of like the more usual book that I read, but this is another fantasy, romance, romantasy, whatever you want to call it. And this is like a cat and mouse sort of story with a witch and a witch hunter. I talked about this again in my reading vlog, my 24-hour readathon, but there's a very, very interesting magic system here that is blood-based, but our main character, because she wants to hide the fact that she's a witch, she uses her period blood to do magic. And that's all I'm gonna tell you for now. You have to read this book. When I first got introduced to this magic system of using the period blood, I was like, what? I was just kind of so taken aback by it. I'm like, wow, like you went there. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, that's honestly kind of genius. Like, that is so smart. Like, why not? Right? Like, why would you like cut yourself and make all these scars on your body for your blood to do your witch magic when you could just collect your blood very naturally once a month and save it up? But yeah, Heartless Hunter. I don't really want to tell you too much about the plot because I kind of went into this a little bit blind and thoroughly enjoyed the experience. So I kind of want you to go into this the same way I did. All you have to know is that there's a witch and a witch hunter and it's a romantasy. That's pretty much it. It's very fast paced. The writing I found was very reminiscent to like a Fourth Wing writing style where it was very easy to devour. The magic system and the world weren't so complex, so you're able to focus on more of like the plot, the romance, the stuff that was going on. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was a ride. It was exhilarating. It was thrilling. The romance had me like feeling all the angst and the yearning. I really liked it, and I'm so excited for the second book because the way this book ended, I wouldn't say it's like Fourth Wing level cliffhanger pain, but there's definitely like a lot of dramatic events that happen at the end of this book, and they leave you kind of reeling at the end, and you're like, okay, like where are we gonna go in the second book? I'm so excited. So Heartless Hunter, I would recommend. It's just a whole lot of fun. If you want fast-paced, turn off your brain, kind of just like great fun, it's great. I wrote in my note here actually, plot holes galore, but I ate it up. And that basically sums up this book. Okay, I read a novella, Natural Selection by Elin Hilderbrand. This is a short story that is not set on Nantucket. Plot twist. This book didn't really leave so much of an impression on me. I think it was very similar to Humor Me that I read at the beginning of the month, where I was like, okay, but what was the point? Like the ride, the journey, the book, it was fine, but like, where are we at the end of this book now? Like, why did I read this? In this short story novella, we follow a woman who is about to embark on this like very exciting Galapagos Island cruise with her boyfriend. They're at the airport, and right before they board the plane, her boyfriend gets a call. He comes back and he's like, hey, I'm so sorry. I actually cannot go on this trip. I have to go take care of some business with my like ex-wife, my kids, but I want you to still go on this vacation. Like, please don't pause your vacation on account of me. You go by yourself. Here's my camera, take some pictures. I'll talk to you after the trip. So she's like, okay, this is weird. It was like his idea to go on this trip in the first place, and now I'm just going by myself to the Galapagos Islands. But she ends up going. We spend a week with her on this cruise. She makes some friends. She does some thinking. She does some self-reflecting while she's on this trip. And then at the end of the trip, she comes to some sort of conclusions that obviously I'm not gonna say. But I found this to be kind of like a, why did I read this book? It was fine. I like Elin Hilderbrand's writing, so it was like enjoyable to read, but yeah, at the end I was like, why? Like what even happened? Like not much happened, and it was a novella, so not much could have happened, but I didn't really see the point of why this was a novella. I honestly think if Elin had more length in this book, if this was like a full-length novel, maybe it would have been better. We would have been able to spend more time with our characters, just like got deeper into some sort of a plot. I think this book and this idea could have worked because I see what she was trying to do with this book, kind of connecting natural selection theory, Darwin, right, with the Galapagos Islands, putting that, like superimposing that onto our main character's relationship in her life. I understand what Elin was trying to do, but we needed more pages to get there. I then read Impractical Magic by Emily Grimoire, and I find that like every time I do a 24-hour readathon, there's always one book that leaves my mind completely. Because you read so much during these readathons, there's always one book that I'm just like, I try and think back and I'm like, I read that? Because the whole day becomes a blur. The last time I did a readathon, it was When Among Crows by Veronica Roth that like left my mind. In this readathon, it's Impractical Magic by Emily Grimoire. This, from what I remember, is sort of a Gilmore Girls, but like add magic. So we have like a Gilmore Girls kind of Stars Hollow vibe in terms of the town we're in. We have 3 sisters, I think, and a mother, maybe, who are trying to save an inn. So like very Stars Hollow, very Lorelai Gilmore, right? But we have a little magic because this inn has been cursed. There's some sort of a curse that's been put onto it. Things aren't going right, and it's up to these sisters to like save it, bring it back up again. And that's all I remember. Like, I don't remember the details or like any of the plot points in this book. I think there's a bit of a romance in it, like a second chance type of a childhood to now adults romance, I think. Overall, I remember that this book didn't really do it for me. I think the writing was very, like, I couldn't focus on it because the way it was written, it was very much trying to emulate Gilmore Girls. Like, this book was trying to be Gilmore Girls in a book form so bad. I think also similar to Humor Me, that was trying to emulate a sort of type of a way of talking. Like, Humor Me was trying to emulate that stand-up comedy, and then this book was trying to emulate that Gilmore Girls very fast-paced talking type of a vibe. But again, this style of dialogue and writing, I feel like only works when you have the right people to perform it, to present it in that rhythm that it's supposed to be told. And so this book was also kind of very run-on sentency for me, very long, rambly, dialogue heavy, and yeah, I couldn't get into it. And I honestly don't remember much more about it, so... Next up was The Sirens by Amelia Hart, which I was so excited to read because this is the same author who wrote Wayward last year, and I loved that book. This was very similar vibes, but instead of with witches, we had sirens, or like mermaids. We follow in this one 2 different timelines that are sort of connected. Very similar to Wayward if you've read it. One that is more modern day. We have another one that is 1800s? Did I write this down? 1800s, I got it right, I remembered. So in our current timeline, or like modern day one, we follow a girl, what was her name? I don't remember her name. Lucy. It's a good thing I write these things down. We start off with Lucy, who's in college. She starts having some like really weird dreams. An incident happens where she's like, oh no, I can't go back from this incident. She's like sleepwalking, does something she really regrets while she's sleepwalking, and then she just like runs away to her sister. She's like, I feel like my sister can help me with this. But when she arrives at her sister's house, she realizes her sister's not there and she's like kind of missing. And so this whole mystery starts and she has to figure out what happened to her sister now. And then in our 1800s timeline, we have 2 twins that are convicted of, I don't know if they actually killed a guy or if they hurt someone. They hurt a man, and these twins are exiled. They're sent on a ship. And then throughout the book, similar to Wayward, we start seeing these connections between our 1800s timeline and our modern day timeline. I can't say more without spoiling anything because that's the type of book that this is. I really love Amelia Hart's writing, and I think her writing was really good in this book too. The one thing I had with this book though was that the timelines were a little bit confusing. With Wayward, I knew exactly what timeline we were in whenever we're in them because they were all so different, but I feel like for some reason in this book, I don't know if it was the formatting of the book or the way it was told, I found the timeline to be a little bit confusing for me, and like I didn't know when we were kind of like jumping back and forth. Like the 1800 timeline was very clear to me, but then like even within that timeline we would jump back and forth. And for a modern day timeline we would like jump back 5 years and then like back up and then back 10 years and then back up. Like I don't know. For some reason, I was having a rough time keeping track of like what happened when. Then at the end, when everything clicked, I was like, okay, I get it now. But then I wish I could have reread the book from the beginning, knowing what I knew at the end, which was a very interesting feeling. But I did overall love this book. One thing I particularly liked about this book was that the sirens were portrayed in kind of a stronger feminine light. I think just like the whole mythology of the siren, like sirens are usually portrayed as like these evil creatures, right? And we kind of get that a bit in this book, but really we get more like strong female characters. I just really liked how that was portrayed. The last 2 books I read in this month were the really long ones. So I actually reread Empire of Storms and then I reread Kingdom of Ash. And I skipped over Tower of Dawn, I know. Because I really wanted to get to Kingdom of Ash, but I think I will. I owe Tower of Dawn a reread because on my first read of Throne of Glass, you guys know this, but I did the tandem read and I just feel like I need to try and enjoy Tower of Dawn on its own without like the jumping back and forth. So I will get back to Tower of Dawn at one point, but I reread Empire of Storms and Kingdom of Ash. And what an emotional journey that was. Like even on the reread, the amount of times I cried, literally, like, I don't think another book has ever made me feel the way I feel about Kingdom of Ash. Like, ever. Like, the way this series ends, the way everything comes together, the pieces. The more details that I picked up on this reread made this series even better. I was like, I did not think that the Throne of Glass series could get better. And then on the reread, it got even better. Incredible. This series is a masterpiece. I wrote down now my final ranking of the Throne of Glass books that I thought I'd share with you guys now that I have reread. In last place, we'll start from last to first. Last is Tower of Dawn, which I think is unfair because yeah, I do have to reread it and give it another chance and see, but I'm just not a Kale girly. I'm just not. Second last, Throne of Glass. Then we have Assassin's Blade, Heir of Fire, and Crown of Midnight, which I actually really love. Empire of Storms. And then these two are very interchangeable for me depending on the day, but second favorite is Kingdom of Ash and favorite is Queen of Shadows. So with that being said, I've been talking for so long. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what your favorite read of September was. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!